from the flood zones as were added. So if FEMA was only doing this to increase the number of policies, they're not doing a very good job of it. But it certainly does affect the people that were moved in. And I'm not saying that there aren't mistakes on the maps. Every map has a mistake. Two engineers can look at the same stream and do a flood study and come up with somewhat different results. It doesn't mean either one of them is wrong. And I've got the engineer who's nodding his head. But certainly, that person's not going to believe what I say. He's not going to believe what you say. But
they think it's very
yeah, and I can assure you that's not the case. But I understand that it affects certain individuals.
What does someone do then if they do question the flood mapping? If they're in a floodplain now, how do they go about having that addressed?
Okay, so how does somebody go about addressing it? Basically, you need to prove that the map is wrong. There's a couple ways of doing it. Let's say you're on the edge of the flood zone, and these maps they determine a flood elevation. And even in the approximate flood zones, there's a flood elevation in the model. It's just not as detailed. They then look at the ground elevation and draw a line where the flood elevation intersects the ground elevation. Where that line is drawn is based on a topographic model. It's done by a combination of LIDAR, which is an aerial topographic model, which is supplemented by ground survey along the streams themselves. But the LIDAR is accurate in general to about plus or minus a foot. FEMA standards are that each LIDAR point, they ground truth a bunch of LIDAR points, and 95% of them have to be within a foot of reality. So let's say you're just barely in the flood zone. There's a possibility that if you hire a surveyor, that surveyor will find that your lowest ground is actually a little higher than that flood elevation, and then you can get what's called a letter of map amendment that gets you out of it. If you're deeper in the flood zone and you can't show that, then it's really, unfortunately, it's really a matter of having to somehow redo the study. And that becomes more expensive and more difficult.
Yes, but along that line, I believe that a lot of the flood mapping, wasn't there not an elevation established in some of these flood zones? So I could say, like, this is my house elevation, but I don't know what the flood elevation is because it wasn't determined in the flood map. Is that correct? This map said it was an
Right, these A zones, these approximate flood zones, there's no elevation on the map, but the good thing is that the new studies, even though the elevation isn't on the map, the elevation is on the GIS information behind the map.
Oh, so there's actually an elevation, I could find it in A zone?
If you've got the GIS data behind it, you can find it. Otherwise, you can call my office. I can go into our GIS and dig it out. FEMA doesn't use it for insurance rating purposes because they don't consider that it's specific enough, but they would use it as input data for a letter of map amendment. Anyone else? Yes?
How many municipalities in New York or the Hudson Valley are part of the community rating system?
How many municipalities in New York are part of the community rating system? Far too few. I don't know of, there's a couple in Westchester. I don't know of any in Dutchess County, and there's only about 26 communities statewide, so it's far too underutilized, and it's one of my pet peeves about the program. I was on a conference call for an hour and a half today with